Hi, I'm Michael Wargo, team pilot with FMS, and today we are going to do another in this new series about how to get absolutely the most out of your plane. In this video, we are going to discuss everything you need to know about this plane, from any idiosyncrasies in takeoff, landing, flap settings, expectations, how to make sure your first flight is successful. Then how to fly it, how to land it. We're going to take all the mystery out of everything, and this includes some really advanced flying. I mean, I really flew some really cool aerobatics with this thing and did things that maybe many of you won't do, and there's some advanced pilots that just want to get the absolute most out of this. But I want to start from basic setup and assembly and things like that, and go right through the most advanced flying and special setups that I have. And in the end, I will leave you all my personal settings to do all the crazy aerobatics and things that I do, including mixing for knife edge and things like that. First, there's not a lot I want to go over with assembly and setup, just because I don't want the video to get too long, and most of it is very self-explanatory in the manual. But some really nice features about this is that it is super easy to assemble at the field. There's only 3 screws to hold the wings on and the strut, and they snap on. No servo leads to plug in or anything like that. They literally just snap in, so they're very easy. Initial assembly was super easy, and apart from snapping on a couple of ball links and making some adjustments to the ailerons and things to make sure they're both matching, it was really a breeze. So you just like any other model, you zero out your transmitter and all the sub trims and things, adjust the ball links in to make sure all of the surfaces are level. And basically that's it. It's all very, very turnkey. Assemble the prop. One thing I want you to note is the absolutely massive size of the wheels. This is one thing that I really love about this plane. It's, of course, like a bush plane, an STOL, a very short takeoff and landing aircraft. And, of course, I'm going to be demonstrating some of that with the flying. But, one thing everybody should love about this plane is, on fields with high grass, or, if you're just taking it somewhere that there's just an open field, of course, there's not a nice, pretty flat runway like where I'm at. So, you can take off and land just about anywhere. Okay. The first little critical bit of setup is to make sure you get the flaps in a couple of different positions. Takeoff flaps might be just a little bit of flaps, and you can adjust it to how you think. And for this plane, that flap setting it kind of substitutes for full flaps when there's a little bit of wind or too much wind. I, of course, land this with no flaps if the wind is really high. The plane tends to want to float. Then, of course, when you don't have any wind and you want to do a really short landing or do some kind of fancy flying, there's full flaps. And I found that the settings that are in the manual are just right. They're very good. All I did was I took the low flaps setting, the first flap setting, and brought it up a little bit because I wanted just a little less lift. And I also use that setting for when I'm trying to hover the plane. It helps me get the nose in the air without having to use full flaps. Well, one of the first things that we're going to go over as far as flying the aircraft is concerned is something that is really, really, really common with people flying this type of aircraft. This is a tail dragger. Now, this is a problem that's caused a lot of crashes. And again, the point of this video is to make sure you fly it safely and you don't have to worry about repairs or accidentally harming it. it's very easy to fly into obstacles, go off the runway, because I am going to show you this. The first tendency of a tail dragger, if you watch the aircraft, the first tendency is as soon as I hit the throttle, the torque of the motor is going to force the plane left. And what often happens is people will pull the throttle off, it'll roll into something, or they'll pull the throttle off and they don't have enough power to get off the ground, or they have to force this takeoff across the runway. It happens all the time. So I want you to watch right here, and then I'll show you what to do to prevent it. As soon as I hit it, you see it turning left? And now look, I'm making it almost made a circle. We were just discussing just how big a problem, tail draggers turning hard left, and people were telling me stories about, very large, scale airplanes that immediately just go left and end up crashing on takeoff because of this. That dynamic, believe it or not, is completely unnecessary. It's just something the motor is doing to kind of to make it torque to the left. There's a couple ways to counteract it, and one is obviously I can just hold the little right rudder when I start, and once it starts going straight, release it, and it goes. The other is a bit more simple, and that is don't be tentative with the power. When the plane starts going off the runway a little bit, this thing will jump off the ground instantly, and before you know it, you're flying, even though you didn't even want to fly. So if that happens, then you get caught right at stall speed with the nose in the air, and it ends up causing a lot of problems. The best way to do it is potentially point it a little to the right. I'm not going to, but also I'm going to hold just a tiny bit of right rudder. But the big trick is, don't be bashful with the power. If you just go ahead and get the power going enough that the tail can come off the ground and it starts moving forward, as soon as the plane is moving forward, it will go straight. You don't have to worry about it going to the left anymore, unless you accidentally have some rudder in it or something like that. You watch this aircraft, you'll see I can take off perfectly straight. I have a little right rudder because I'm going very slow, and as soon as I get some speed, that plane just goes dead straight, and then I can lift off at will. Okay, as Tom was just saying, there's many other reasons that the plane wants to turn left when you start, and the other is, there is different levels of lift between the descending blade on the propeller and the ascending blade, and that makes it want to turn left as well. There's also a slipstream on the rudder that automatically makes it want to turn a little bit left on takeoff. But you see, if you do it right and you just go ahead and commit and add some power, the plane will just keep rolling straight, because once that tail comes off the ground, unless one of the wheels is tight or something like that, it will generally just track straight like it's flying. So that's the way to do it. Now, the other really big deal with takeoff, it does have takeoff flaps, but you don't need them. These takeoff flaps, I use them for certain flying configurations or landing when I've got a little bit of wind, but I really want it to slow down. Again, this is an STOL aircraft. If I start with any flaps, it is going to jump off the ground. With your very first flight, two things. Do not have the stabilization on. It's a wonderful stabilization system, but take off without it, just to make sure everything is working properly. You click it on the first time while you're in the air. The other thing is, I love the way an airplane looks when it just takes off beautifully, just lifts itself off the ground. So if you have this aircraft, don't start pulling the rudder or the elevator. It will want to just jump off the ground, and the takeoffs look ugly. And I just don't see any reason to do it unless you're in a very short area. And in a minute, I'll show you the STOL, the super fast takeoff, if you have a short area. But right now, here's what I consider the quintessentially perfect takeoff. And all you need to do is get the thing rolling. And we have it going to go straight. and just let it just lift off. You see how really nice that is? And take off slowly. I'm just barely up to 15 feet now by the end of the runway. If you take off with the elevator, right? If you take off with the elevator, here's what it'll look like. It's a whole different animal. The first one looks like a real scale aircraft, and the second one looked a little ridiculous and like, you know, an RC airplane. So, in my opinion, we should take off with no flaps. And here you'll see a no flaps landing, and I think they look so much nicer because the plane uses a little bit of runway. I absolutely love the way this looks, landing with no flaps. I can land really short with flaps, and we're going to demonstrate this later. But I think it looks much better with no flaps. The wing has so much lift that it lands very slow anyway. So the flaps in many cases are kind of pointless unless you really need to slow it down. This is maybe a combination of first flight and flight experiences and kind of how to fly it when you finally get the thing up in the air and going. Again, flying it a little more scale makes the plane look better. It makes you look better as a pilot. And once again, we're going to start with a takeoff that looks really nice. We're flying straight, and we're just going to let it, we're going to let it leave the ground and have a nice gradual ascent. Nice, slow, even turns. If you're a more experienced pilot especially, you know, if you're going to fly one of these and you're an expert pilot, I don't know, I think it looks a lot better to fly them very scale. Nice. You see how long I'm flying dead straight? One little bank, and I'm going to come in at the same bank. I'm going to fly it right down the, guide it right down the runway to do a nice low pass. And how pretty that looks. Anyway, you know, especially more advanced pilots. I mean, this is the absolutely perfect plane for a beginner. It is so docile, flies very slow. It's just a beautiful aircraft. But for advanced pilots, this plane will do quite a few aerobatics that you may have seen in my other flight video, and I'll demonstrate a little bit today. But even basic aerobatics with this plane are very, very nice. So we're going to do right now a nice big loop. Personally, I think this stuff looks really nice with the high wing planes. It has a nice roll rate to get the plane rolling. This particular plane, with the mixing that I have done with it, which I will be explaining later, you know, believe it or not, it just does these really beautiful, perfect point rolls. 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, they're as good as an aerobatic plane, and it really surprised me with this aircraft. These are all some nice basic aerobatics, but the plane looks beautiful. You'll see with some of the advanced flying I did that the plane flies and handles very, very well, inverted even. So if you want to show off a little bit and fly the plane low and inverted, look at this, how pretty it is and how straight it flies. Anyway, as always with all the aircraft, my suggestion is to fly nice big maneuvers, slow, deliberate turns. Everything always makes the aircraft look good. So let's come in for a landing. Again, here's the flaps on landing. So now I've got full flaps, and you'll watch how slow it'll come in. We got to be very careful because it'll go back up again. Now we're going to take a look at the STOL features. That means short takeoff and landing. This thing will be off the ground in a millisecond. I'm just literally going to hit full power. I have full flaps, and you'll see absolutely just up it goes. Just a couple feet.
Take flaps off.
Now this section is going to be about landing, okay? This will probably be one of the easier planes you will ever have to land, except it's going to give you a bit of trouble in one area. As soon as the wheels touch the ground, if you are not slow, it is going to bounce back up. I will demonstrate that.
Landing flaps.
I'll put the flaps on. Now watch what's going to happen when the plane hits the ground. No matter, even relatively slow, it's going to want to bounce back up and have a landing that doesn't look too pretty.
Flaps off.
So in order to avoid this, you're really going to have to make sure that the aircraft itself is configured with the flaps to make sure that doesn't happen. If you don't have any wind, I said a little bit earlier that a nice long approach, no flaps, to me is the best way to land it because the plane looks absolutely beautiful. Look, I'm holding it off the ground and it'll touch down super, super soft. I can land it soft like that just all day long, no flaps. It really didn't take very much runway. Now I'm going to do a landing with the first level of flaps, and I'm going to show you the difference. Now this is my first level of flaps. These are takeoff flaps. I have some down elevator mixed in it. I will show you my settings at a later point in the video. I'm coming in. Now you can see I can kind of do almost the same thing. I can touch down very fast, just a tad slower, but you see its tendency to want to bounce a little bit. That's because the flaps are down. With the flaps down, it wants to just kind of rise up again because the plane is so buoyant. And any additional flaps is going to make the plane want to take off again. Now we're going to do a landing with full flaps, and I'm going to show you how to do a landing with full flaps. If you're going to land with full flaps, the bottom line is you have to be very slow. Do not let the plane touch down.
Landing flaps.
So I have full flaps on now. You can already see the plane starting to want to rise and slow down really dramatically. So I'm going very, 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 very slow, and then it'll touch down. If you have a headwind, you can almost land stopped with those flaps, but you have to be very careful to not let the plane touch down. If you touch it down with any forward speed, with wind in the face and flaps, it's going to want to balloon right back up again. As soon as the tail drops, it changes the wing incidence and up it goes. So keep that in mind. And like I said, it's really how the plane is set up that is going to set you up for success while you're landing it. But for advanced pilots, this thing can be set up to do a lot of aerobatics, as you saw in my video, and I'm going to show you a little bit more today. But the big key is the mixing. I'm going to show you my mixes that I use. There's a tremendous amount of rudder aileron mix and some rudder elevator mix to keep the plane straight. But if you put the mixes in, this plane will slow roll nice and straight. Look how pretty this it looks. Kind of amazing for a high wing airplane, isn't it? You can slow roll really beautifully. With the mixes, you can point roll, just like this. The mixes allow you to fly the plane so much more precisely. I leave the mixes on all the time. And even if you're not an advanced pilot, I certainly recommend you doing it because the plane handles much, much better. Low turns, if you're inverted or upright and you want to make a bit of a flat turn, you see this nice flat turn coming down towards the runway? I'll make a turn off of this, watch. Nice and flat. To make a flat turn with a plane like this is ridiculous if you don't have any mixing in it. The other mix, of course, is the throttle elevator. And to fly fast, I am at full throttle right now. My battery is a little low, but you see the plane isn't going up or down. And that's because of the throttle elevator mix. Okay, here is another thing for advanced pilots that I suggest. Right now, as you can see, there is a hole underneath where this is screwed to the control horn. And I'm going to change it to the bottom hole to be able to get more throw out of the elevator. If you do want to hover, you do want anything like that, I already have everything set on my high rates to as much as I can get. To make sure I have the control I need to do aerobatics. And in order to really have this reach its potential, I need to get a little more elevator. As you can see, the ball link is sitting a little lower on the elevator control horn, and now we're going to fly it like that. There's a lot of nice benefits to the additional elevator. One of them is, maybe on knife edge to be able to turn a little sharper. But the biggest benefit, of course, is if you're going to try and hover or something like that. So we're going to come down to the runway. And we're going to try and hover. I'm going to add a tiny bit of flaps to it. And the flaps are going to help me get that plane up into a hover faster. You see how much quicker it stands up. So now we're going to do it a little lower down here. I had a plane here on the runway, so I couldn't bring it in any closer. All right, we're going to see if we can get a nice hover. I've got half flaps and, of course, the increased elevator, and we're going to pull the nose up sharp and see if we can get it to hover. And that's looking nice. It's always going to want to lean to the left a little bit, and you have to add a lot of rudder to keep it there. But for those of you that want to try it, that's how to do it. This is not an aerobatic aircraft. Crazy, huh? Pretty interesting. Man, with this kind of... All right. All right, we're going to try something I don't know if I've ever seen. Is I'm going to take a high wing and I'm going to do a long, slow roll right off takeoff. Or a long, slow half roll. Okay, one of the things that I personally do for the aircraft, and of course is for, advanced pilots, there's a couple of tricks. And the first trick is I mix out its coupling and bad tendencies. Can you see, I'm going to deflect the rudder. You see what's going on with the ailerons? When I hit the rudder, the ailerons go. So basically when I deflect the rudder, the plane wants to turn this way. It wants to rotate. It's a very natural tendency for all high wings. So it wants to roll left. So if you want to make a flat turn or you want to fly on knife edge, which is why I did it, okay, because I've done a bunch of knife edge flight with this and it's awesome with this mix. I hit that, and as soon as I do this, the aileron is pushing down on this side, and it's going to counteract that rudder that's making it want to go this way. I've heard a lot of people over the years talk about, you should just fly the plane. But for me, mixing is exactly like trimming the aircraft. When you go up and the plane is kind of wanting to nose towards the ground, you hit some elevator to make sure you can let the sticks go and fly hands off, straight level. Well, the reason for this mix is so when you turn on its side, it will fly level. You're basically just trimming it out for flying on its side. So when I did those really nice, pretty point rolls, well, guess what? They wouldn't be possible unless I had done this mix. There's also a little elevator on this mix, and the elevator will move a little bit whenever I mix it, because the plane wants to pull in one direction. I have it mixed out. So the other mix that I use with this aircraft to be able to make sure I'm able to fly it straight is a throttle elevator mix. The bottom line is, when this plane starts, there's so much lift in the wing that as soon as I really accelerate, the plane will automatically rise. Well, what if I want to make a fast pass and stay low? Well, if I do, I'd have to push down elevator when it's low to the ground. And boy, that's a very uncomfortable place to be. So what I had done is I put a mix in that when I push the throttle forward, it feeds in just enough down elevator to keep the plane level. So when I'm at full power, the plane always stays level. So as I gradually go up the throttle, the plane stays just like this. I do that with my jets and some aerobatic airplanes as well, because they all have the same tendency to want to rise. As there's more air going over the wing, it wants to lift a little more. So you just need to counteract it a little bit. And the last thing you want to do is start pushing down elevator, because that is pushing it towards the ground. The amount of elevator fed in is not a lot. Okay? It's not at all. And when you are inverted, it's the only disadvantage is if you're trying to fly a fast low pass, then unfortunately, that mix will pull you towards the ground a little bit, but it's not a problem. The reason it's not a problem is when you go inverted, I always teach to keep your thumbs, below the sticks to make sure you're always putting in the right direction. And when I'm flying inverted, I like to have a little pressure on the back end of the aircraft to make sure that I'm controlling its ascent. And if I release a little bit, it'll go towards the ground. I do not like to have to make maneuvers to pull it lower, because that's dangerous. But if the throttle mix is going to pull it a little towards the ground, you're already pushing up a little bit, so it tends to actually make inverted flight a little more comfortable. So it's a little different than you might think. Okay, when I am hovering, the one thing I really like to do is come in a Harrier configuration and stand it up. This plane doesn't like it. I mean, it simply doesn't like to do that. A wing will drop. Okay, so the way to get this to hover is to, pull the elevator while it's flying a little faster, and it kind of makes a wall and will stop. It ends up coming up a little higher, so it's a little more difficult to bring the plane really low. But this thing will hover. My trick is to add just a little bit of flaps, because this amount of flaps will start canting the nose up pretty fast. I've done it with full flaps and it works like even better, but I have to take the flaps off as soon as it gets up into a hover, because it actually affects the hover a little bit. But anyway, using those flaps on slow flight right before you want to stand it up into a hover is a trick that I use, and I used it on the entire video because I just found it to be much easier. Since shooting the last segment, I have actually added another mix, and this is an elevator flap mix. And as you can see, what happens is when I click the switch on, when I'm trying to hover, I will be able to mix the elevator with the flaps that as soon as I get it up to hover and I relax the elevator, the flaps are no longer, having any effect. So this is a really great mix. My advice, of course, is to make it on a switch rather than constant on. I always recommend that we take off and land on high rates. The trick is to set the expo so that it kind of feels like low rates in the center so you can fly smoothly. But if you ever want to do a quicker roll or anything like that, you can do it because you have it set up that you can grab all the surface that you want. If you are brand new at the sport or really only comfortable with lower rates, go ahead and set yourself a lower rate. If all you're going to do is fly around, land, and things like that, not going to do anything aerobatic, it's really not that big a deal. But I would really try and learn to have a plane and be able to fly a high wing on high rates because it's very docile to begin with.